All right. So, what are some ways that folks can start preparing for
Yeah.
CMMC now?
So obviously figuring out the level is important. I want to say it's not 100% required. It's important. It's 100% required if you want to get serious, but if you want to do something, there's plenty you can do. I would obviously target CMMC level 1 if you don't know what else to do. But determining the level, right? If you can figure out what level you're going to be, ask your contracting officer, ask your primes, ask anyone upstream of you, just ask, and they may not know. Everybody's trying to figure this out together.
And
But
just in case somebody's jumping in at this point, the difference between CMMC 3, 2, and 1 more time.
Sure. So CMMC level 1 means you're not interacting with any controlled unclassified information, commonly referred to as CUI. Level 3 means you are dealing with CUI and more, meaning ITAR export data. And level 1 just means you don't have CUI, but you have FCI, federal contract information. And don't wonder what that is. Everything to do with a contract's federal contract information. It could be a receipt from a lunch you went on. Well, maybe not. There's some nuance there, but you get what I'm saying. Yeah, so that's the first thing you need to do is figure out what level you need to be. We talked about previously, but in case someone is jumping in, what information systems you interact with. So information systems can be anything from email to an application to a server and a file share to a network. You're going to have to know every information system and how the data flows and the data types that flow through it. And we've probably talked about that in more than half these slides, but identifying the different types of data and how they move through your information systems is that second line item, but it's so much of the work. Like that's a big chunk of the work. Once you know all that stuff, you move into the scope and flow. So, you want to scope your environment. You want to make it as small as you can. I know we just have scope and flow here, but theoretically you want to put systems that are in scope, meaning they're exposed to CUI or FCI or whatever, depending on your level. We want to keep that footprint as small as possible. And then we want to make sure that we document with 100% accuracy how we're flowing through those in scope systems. I actually scope people too, which is something I never hear that talked about. When I'm doing we have a flow chart that I put everything through. I call it the perfect flow chart, meaning I can take anything from a network switch to a person that works in HR to a mobile device to the boss's cell phone and run it through that flow chart and find out where it is in the scope, because it's not just in scope and out of scope. We can't possibly do a video on that.
Yeah.
And I'm rambling, but mapping out the scope and flow of everything is hugely important.
How long does that exercise typically take?
It depends on the participation by the client. It's pretty fast, honestly. I have a few key things I ask for right off the jump. One is a org chart, employee list, asset inventory list if they have one. If they're already a client of ours, but they're just getting started with compliance, as you know, we have all that stuff for the most part. And, it's a meeting to work through it. And I just start flowing things down. Usually by the time I have the meeting, I've already done my best guess. It's kind of a confirmation meeting. So that goes pretty fast. Although it never fails to learn about something new. I've got all these assets. I've got all these employees, and I'm on the call and they're like, oh, yeah, what about the 6 tablets? What's 6 tablets? There's no tab. You're tracking them in your asset tracker. Like, right, what 6 tablets are you talking about? So that's usually where it's pretty fast, to be honest.
It's probably good to point out that the whole point of the scoping it's not supposed to be some big gotcha moment, right? It's really an organization-wide exercise to try to paint a picture and kind of build this view of how
it's the whole thing, right? And what I mean by the whole thing is my entire workflow that I use for compliance is built to make sure that you, as a government contractor, can keep doing government contracts. That's how it's built. So if we need to make it cheaper, we're going to make it cheaper. And I'm not talking about, how much anything costs that we're selling you. I'm just talking about, I'm going to give you as many tools and directions for success to make sure that you can keep doing it, because people always talk about this as a burden. It can also be an advantage. The bell's going to ring one day, and all the people that have this stuff in order have a huge advantage.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So it's kind of pointless to talk about it as a burden all the time. But anyway, I'm getting on my soapbox.
All right. So we covered scope and flow. So conducting a baseline assessment and then the gap assessment after.
Yeah. And I had Eric, I split these out intentionally because there's kind of there's really more than 2. But when we're using our compliance management software and our GRC frameworks, I like to do a very fast baseline assessment that basically tells me where a client thinks they are. That's not really the same thing as a gap assessment where we're getting a little more into the weeds. Like you said, you have password, strong passwords enforced. And then when I look on my tool, we don't. So now we have a gap, right? The baseline assessment is just a way to do two things. One, it gives me a really quick look at, again, where the client thinks they are, but also brings things to the client's attention. It helps getting the mentality of what we're going to be going through going. So they're two different assessments, and they are run with a little bit of a gap between them. So baseline goes first, and then we do some data collection, some policy review, if you have existing policies, and then we do a real gap assessment. So that's something you all would want to do. That's why it's here, how to prepare. If you need to jump straight to a gap assessment, you can. There's some really simple ones and even free tools. You can look up an SPRS score assessment sheet. It's got most of the controls, if not all of the 800-171 controls, but should put you in pretty good shape for level 2. And then develop a timeline. So I like to make sure that my clients and I have a timeline because I need it done next week isn't a real timeline. And we get asked that, which is comical to me. So having a timeline to meet what you found in your gaps is pretty important.
And we didn't talk about this before, so hopefully this doesn't throw a wrench into the whole discussion, but policies and procedures. We haven't really seen that much in here. How painful is that? Is that typically what holds up a lot of the process, or is it normally go very smoothly?
It can and does, but not for the reasons people think. So there's two things I'll say about policy and procedure. Policy and procedure, you probably don't have what's required. And that's okay. It's not unusual. You also do not have to write it from scratch. There's templates, like we give our clients templates. We work through the templates with our clients. There's templates out there. You can go find them, especially in today's market. The marketplace is abuzz with all these people that have the CMMC solutions, but you can find good sets of templates to work through. I'll tell you this though, and this is back to your point, Eric, where it will not point, but question, does it sink a lot of time? Where I run into issues is where, I'm working with a client. I've been working with them for a month. They've given me kind of one person to work with regularly to go back and forth on. And we're talking about policy and procedure, and some of those adjustments or some of those responsibilities that fall into the client, the person I'm working with can't always say for sure, yes, this is correct. You start talking about breach reporting, incidents response, log review, auditing and accountability, all these different sections that have policies attached to them and procedures. They don't always know who from their side. So it creates these little gaps, but they stack up. So that's where we lose a good bit of time, is trying to get almost, I don't want to call it buy-in because you can't buy in, it's required, but it's more, okay, I'm going to go ask my boss if this is the person that should be responsible for this type of action in the shared responsibility matrix or whatever. So we lose some time there to be.
But that's part of I know that's part of the process, is just walking through developing the policies and procedures if they don't have them already. Identifies, okay, we need to get clarification on A, B, and C from higher up, and make sure we got all that in line. So
and I'm going to add one piece to that. Sometimes you can have a technical gap. Let's call it multi-factor isn't turned on everywhere. So we decide that in our policy procedure, we're going to turn it on everywhere, right? And then we say, okay, policy's good. You guys good with it? And they say, yep. Okay. When do you want to turn it on? Well, we can't turn it on now. Okay, well, when? Like you get these little gaps. I mean, I've had those things sneak into a week or more, when meanwhile the owner of the company is, breathing down everybody's neck to get it done faster. I can't even get you to tell me when to turn MFA on, anyway.
But we say all that to point out that I know there's a lot of hand wringing and concern about, hey, we're just trying to run the business, do the day-to-day work, and now we've got to set everything aside to work on all this paperwork, all these procedures and policies. But Curtis mentioned the templates that we have available that helps with speed things up significantly. Oh yeah. And then just talking to somebody like, somebody like Curtis that has done this before, been down this road before, can save a whole lot of time, and rather than trying to invent something from scratch.
It can
by yourself.
It can.